Okay, good morning, everyone. And a very warm welcome to this AFME and PwC webinar on artificial intelligence and compliance. My name is Michael Norton, and I'm an Associate Director for Compliance in AFME. I lead work on compliance, and I'm joined this morning by my colleague, Aman Luther, who is an equivalent to me in our Tech Ops function, who works on AI, and also by Bal Krishnamurthy from PwC, and Sarah Kidd, also from PwC. We are here to present a webinar to you this morning. AFME and its members have a keen interest in AI and compliance. And as a result of this, 1 year ago, asked AFME to produce a report with PwC on the challenges and opportunities which exist for the compliance function relating to artificial intelligence. This report was published and was well received. And 12 months down the line, AFME's members asked the Trade Association to follow up on this report and produce a webinar to examine progress which has been made in the 12 months since, and to consider best practice amongst peers and where the industry might go in the 12 months ahead. We therefore agreed with PwC to prepare this webinar and to consider the progress of the last 12 months and to do a little bit of a state of the art, an examination of where things are now. PwC and AFME conducted a series of interviews with leading firms to discuss activity in the AI and compliance space, and PwC will shortly present the key findings of these interviews. We will then open a panel discussion to discuss your thoughts. AFME will moderate the webinar, but we will now pass over the floor to PwC to present the results of up-to-the-minute research. Sarah, Bal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael, and a very good morning to all of you. We are delighted to co-host this webinar with our friends at AFME. And just by the way of introduction, my name is Bal Krishnamurthy. I'm a UK partner at PwC, and a lot of work I do is helping organizations on their compliance transformation journeys, which is increasingly taking the form of leveraging technology intervention and AI. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Bal, and good morning, everyone. My name's Sarah Kidd. I'm a senior manager in our risk and compliance transformation practice at PwC. Similarly to Bal, my focus is on compliance technology and compliance operating models. And along with Bal, I was one of the authors on the paper last year. So really excited to share kind of where we are 12 months on.
Fantastic. Just as we kick off in terms of this webinar, we thought it would be useful just to level set a little bit and frame some of the key themes that came out of the paper we did last year, which was published 14 months ago. And a lot of that will really form the basis of a lot of the discussion that's going to come through in this panel. So let me start just by doing a little bit of framing and context setting. The paper we did, just as a recap for those who have read it, was really exploring two questions. It was looking at the opportunities for the compliance function to leverage AI, and it was also looking at the other side of the coin. It was looking at how compliance functions and the role compliance functions had with respect to oversight monitoring of AI in terms of the usage across the organization. Just to frame a few themes that came out that we will build upon. 14 months ago, we saw compliance functions being at relatively an early stage of adoption of AI. We saw the business functions were actually driving at a greater degree of pace. However, compliance as an area and as a community recognized the significant opportunity for leveraging AI. And there was a consensus around a number of different use cases. And we'll touch upon that and see how those use cases have evolved in the last 14 months as well. There was a lot of debate last year, about 14 months ago, of what is AI and what does that mean for compliance functions. Largely, we saw AI monitoring governance being aligned to existing frameworks such as model risk management. And also we saw a commonality and consensus in the sort of risks that AI poses to organizations. That's evolved. Sarah will pick up a little bit about that and we'll walk through that a little bit more as well. In terms of the role of compliance, such an interesting theme that we looked at last year, there was probably quite variability last year. Compliance functions were asking the question, is it only the monitoring role? How do compliance functions engage in overseeing AI? A lot of that seems to have developed quite a lot in the last 14 months. There is more clarity on the governance side. And finally, AI in terms of skill set, digital literacy for compliance professionals, and skill sets around training, workforce, all of those were debated quite heavily. And again, we'll learn quite a lot more about how organizations are doing that today. If we just flip to the next slide, Sarah, in terms of the maturity of use cases that we've seen, what you're seeing on the screen there, this is not an exhaustive list of compliance use cases, but certainly the more prevalent and common ones. Broadly speaking, we are seeing compliance functions mature in the usage of AI, but a lot of that is concentrated around those use cases in surveillance, financial crime, surveillance, sanctions, AML, KYC. Those areas seem to have matured a fair bit, whereas some of the others where we see there being lots of opportunities are still in the trial stage, I think it's fair to say. The other piece I think is worthy of note. A lot of compliance functions have, and by and large, most of the compliance functions we spoke to are in some kind of a POC stage, progressing that through. However, still using synthetic dummy data, a few have moved into the live environment, but that's where we see the real opportunity. It feels like it's at the cusp of moving into the live environment and really starting to drive out benefits and change. Where we have seen a lot of adoption, and excitement indeed from the compliance committee is around citizen-led adoption. And we've seen things like Microsoft Copilot, for example, increasingly being used and trialed and experimented right the way throughout compliance and indeed across the organization. I'll touch upon one or two other themes. Benefits of usage of AI, regardless of us being in a cost-pressured environment, we're still seeing organizations really pursue AI, not necessarily under a cost or a benefit quantitative business case, but really looking at the effectiveness of compliance oversight that AI can bring. And the last thing I'll talk about is blockers. When we asked participants last year in the paper what some of the blockers were, we heard lots around data privacy, accuracy, hallucination risk, etc. All of those still exist. However, we're seeing a shift whereby organizations are now getting towards the skills required to use and test AI being the blocker, which we think is really interesting. It again underlines the pace of adoption, and that some of those barriers are being overcome in various different ways. And now we're really thinking about how do we get into the test environment and get the right skills to test. We'll build on all of these as we go throughout the panel discussions today. I'll hand over to Sarah to say a few words about the governance and monitoring.
Great, thank you, Val. As Val said up front, the second question that we looked at as part of our paper last year was around the role of the compliance function in managing the risks that AI or the increased use of AI pose to the whole organization. What we found this year is that the governance and risk management around AI has really matured significantly with more robust processes, frameworks, and governance to manage AI risk and to review and approve AI use cases. From our survey last year, there was still a mix in how AI was being deployed in frameworks and taxonomies, and often it was being specifically managed within one risk type, which was normally model risk. What we're seeing now is that there's much more thinking about the impact of AI across the whole taxonomy, and some organizations actually have it as a horizontal cross-cutting risk, whereby the impact of AI needs to be incorporated into all other risk frameworks. In terms of managing AI risk, Val touched on it earlier, but data privacy is still seen as the main concern for compliance functions when it comes to deploying AI, and they're increasingly collaborating with data privacy officers and other relevant risk management teams. Transparency and hallucination and things like explainability also continue to be a concern as well, with firms nervous about the potential for bias, for example, in AI models. However, there's also a progression in how firms are thinking about second order risks, which is really interesting. So this includes things like customer facing risk, where AI is external and customers are facing off to it, as well as third party risks, where firms are using vendors in AI. One of the other interesting risks that we discussed with one of our interviewees this year was HR risk, so people risk, and how AI might impact the workforce more broadly, which we thought was something really interesting that people were starting to think about. The role of the compliance function is also much more defined than it was than when we interviewed firms last year. In particular, the function's role in managing regulation makes it a really key stakeholder, particularly given we're seeing, increased focus on regulations such as the EU AI Act. Compared to last year, compliance functions have a more formal role in reviewing and approving use cases. So, for example, sitting on the governance committees and forums that review and approve those use cases. And often they perform controls that use cases are performing in line with guidelines or being approved in line with guidelines and internal rules. One firm we spoke to has created a specific compliance checklist that each use case has to go through before it can be approved. We also saw that compliance functions tended to be responsible for reviewing things like classification and safeguarding guidelines around AI, again, bringing through some of that regulatory expertise. We're also seeing a trend within organizations who've invested in data science capabilities within the compliance function, that they're taking more of a lead in oversight, working closely with the business and other teams such as data protection, model risk management, and information security. We'll come back to that theme around collaboration with the first line more as part of our panel later. We're also really interested to hear about how firms are thinking about maturing their risk management further as AI becomes more common in terms of deployment across the organization. One was around further defining the role of the compliance function in ongoing monitoring and testing. As I mentioned earlier, there's an increased role for the compliance function in reviewing and approving use cases before they go live, but actually thinking through how the compliance function has that ongoing role in checking that use cases continue to comply with those requirements. At the moment, from the interviews that we had, it's mainly kind of DPOs, so data protection officers, or operational risk who have responsibility for that, and they'll be looking specifically at things like go live incidents. There's also a desire to streamline the process around governance, which again is something interesting that we heard. A lot of effort has gone into building up these frameworks and processes to make sure that there is the right level of risk management around AI. But we heard that it can be quite burdensome, and actually it can be a real blocker to deploying AI effectively. There's now a desire to prioritize and assess use cases in a more risk-based way, albeit one that still implies with internal and external guidelines. The last thing that we talked about, and Bal mentioned it earlier, and we'll pick up on it more in the panel and later, was around skills. Because obviously that underpins everything that the compliance function is doing when it comes to both using AI and overseeing AI as well. Last year, most firms weren't recruiting specifically for AI skills, and it was really recognized that there was a gap in terms of data and technology literacy within the compliance function. What we've seen is that the drive for AI deployment across the organization has really necessitated skills development within the compliance function. And we're now seeing compliance functions actively hiring data scientists and programmers and people with other skills into their compliance function. Most firms as well, from what we heard, are now running enterprise-wide skills training sessions as well, and are actually helping their employees get accreditation. There are choices to make in terms of the operating model that firms are also continuing to work through. Some firms have central AI teams that sit within a technology function or something similar, and the compliance function can draw down skills from that team. Others have deployed specific AI or data teams within the compliance function. So again, there's not necessarily kind of any right or wrong on that, but it's just some of the things that firms are working through at the moment. And we'll hear more about that in the panel later. So that's a bit of a view on where we are now. And obviously we could talk about this subject for forever. There's so many interesting ways to go. But we want to explore this and bring it to life with some of our panelists who are on the call with us today. So I'm really pleased to be joined by Stephen and Claire. I'm just going to ask them firstly to introduce themselves and their role within the organization, particularly in relation to AI. So Stephen, can I come to you first?
Yeah, thank you, and good morning to everyone. So I'm Stephen Moore, and I'm head of UBS Investment Bank Compliance Analytics function. So I started off my career working in business line compliance as a grad, and over the last 7 years, I've been retraining in data science. I manage a team of data scientists, and we specifically focus on development of data solutions that enhance the second line control environment. This is through exploratory machine learning and more recently AI and large language models. Outside of professional responsibilities, I'm currently engaging in AI research focused on deep reinforcement learning in uncertain environments.
Great, thank you. And Claire? I think we might be having some issues with Claire's audio. Let me just...
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, not sure why. Apologies. So, yes, Senior Director at BNY, heading up the bank's technology and innovation legal team, basically supporting the bank with the development and deployment of AI tools, advising on regulatory compliance, risk mitigation and governance, data usage, and contracts. All the things you'd expect from a legal department. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. So Stephen, you talked in your introduction about your role in data analytics and AI implementation. How would you characterize the opportunity that AI presents for compliance functions?
So I think personally, I see many different ways to answer that question and many different angles. So I think, first of all, the first characteristic of AI is the speed at which it's rapidly changing. If you'd have asked me to characterize AI 2 years ago, I'd have been talking about my team's work with semi-supervised learning and how you can join disparate data sets for thematic analysis. If you ask me today, that response is going to change significantly to focus on generative AI and the use of generative AI in compliance. So I think it's very widely recognized that the autoregressive language models such as ChatGPT represent significant opportunity to build on how we're deriving data insights for risk management in compliance. I think previously in the realm of data science, we very much saw that quantitative data was at the heart of data science as a discipline, with qualitative data analytics being very resource intensive and requiring a very high level of skill set. I think increasingly that's changing towards qualitative data science, and we're now able to, on a very large scale, interrogate qualitative data sources such as emails, policies, meeting minutes, presentations, reg updates, amongst many other. And we no longer need to train bespoke models every time we take a new approach. I think where this technology is really interesting in the compliance space is the ability for the autoregressive models to identify compliance principles that are more broad, such as clear, fair, and not misleading, or balanced opinions, and look at how we can drive that type of complex insight out of qualitative data. I know you're interested in looking at specific examples. So if we're kind of looking at where we can build controls, previously, if you wanted to do a deep dive into written communication, you'd have needed a human to look at it. Whereas now we can run large language models across emails at very large scales in our client communications, and we can pull out these more abstract concepts. I think similarly in the realm of compliance processes, which again is something that I'm sure is close to many of the people on this call, we can increasingly use large language models to perform things such as 4 eyes checks across key actions in compliance. We can use the power of this technology to, in brackets, understand the emails and actions that have been sent to compliance sent to compliance to look at. And at the end of the day, or at the close of business, we can review all of the actions sent by email and ensure that compliance are performing specific tasks such as wall crossing employees or adding issuers to restricted lists.
That's so interesting. I think, I mean, even just what you talked through there shows the amazing potential that AI has across lots of different compliance processes. We've picked up on it before, but in terms of, skills and operating models, obviously to do the things that you described there requires a bit of potentially a skills uplift or thinking through how that works within your team. How have you kind of organizationally established your team in order to kind of position those capabilities within within the compliance function?
Yeah, so I think, again, it's an interesting question, and it's one that's going to be bespoke to every organisation. So from the purpose of compliance within group compliance and regulatory governance, which is our department, I think it's as much the broader structure as it is our specific team. So we have a centre of innovation that is absolutely foundational to bringing in overall strategy, tooling, wider access to data and culture and training. At the heart of it, they're able to ensure that we source data once rather than multiple times, which obviously has benefits in terms of the consistency that we have of data and reducing cost in sourcing it many times. What we've then started to implement is a federated approach where you have teams like mine, which sit specifically in the divisional business aligned compliance. This has increased our ability to be rapid and agile in our responses to emerging risks. Idea generation is right at the coalface, and we're able to loop back to the centre to ensure delivery of consistent standards. So within my team, we send data scientists to both management forums and functional team meetings across global teams such as global markets, banking teams, and financial crime prevention. This gives us the ability to identify opportunities for the use of AI as risks emerge and at the point of initial escalation. I think it's already been mentioned, but one of the specific trends that we see is my team being invited increasingly to front office advisory calls with our front office employees to look at the approaches that they're taking to implementation, including understanding from a data science perspective the exact vocabulary where complex that they're presenting to us. But to bring this all together, I think UBS has put together some very key enablers to have federated data science. We have very strong data protection, data management, data ethics functions with specific SMEs at the core of the organization. We have a strong central teams, as I've mentioned, working on data acquisition, and we have very clear legal guidance that's accessible broadly as to how we can implement and use generative AI technologies across the firm.
Yeah, and you picked up there around, collaboration and potentially, kind of thinking through some of those common use cases across the organization. I mean, Claire, from your perspective then, sitting in legal, what are some of those common use cases that you're seeing in your organization that might be applicable to both functions?
I think definitely for the compliance legal use cases, you'd mentioned some of those. So horizon scanning, regulatory updates, regulatory obligations management. So really looking at, the amount of reg change that we need to do. Can we use AI, generative AI agents to kind of help us through that process? I think in addition to those use cases for legal, what we're really focused on is that kind of contract lifecycle management. So one of the things that we could potentially use AI for the pre-execution, whether or not that's first line review, review of the red lines, looking at checklists. For post-execution, can we use AI to gather some contract intelligence? So perhaps using AI to look at key provisions or key terms in a contract. Are they in the contract? Are there inconsistencies when it comes to the language so that we can identify, potential risks? And then also thinking about using AI to manage relationships against counterparty portfolios and related agreements. So I definitely say that there are some crossovers in terms of AI use cases between legal and compliance, but then there are also some use cases which our department are very much looking into, which are specifically legal. I think at the core, what we're trying to do, and I think that this is the case for both legal and compliance at BNY, is to really seek out ways to be more efficient, effective, and agile in executing our role as strategic partners to the business. So it's no point in us just advising. We need to understand it. We need to be using this in our day-to-day activities.
Great. One of the things as well that I wanted to pick up, because I think that kind of shows again that nicely that collaboration. Stephen, you also talked earlier about collaboration with the first line as well, and some of those strong central teams. A key part of our report highlighted last year the role for compliance to be a collaborator across the organization, given its role in kind of partnering, but also overseeing first line activity. How does your team work with the first line? And can you provide some practical examples of how that works?
Yeah, so absolutely. So kind of as I have described, our team is very much focused on the implementation side, so I can comment on it from that perspective. So UBS as an organization has a very strong and continued focus on having the right culture and being risk aware and delivering outcomes for our clients. In the area of Gen AI, we have both first and second line have our own use cases for this technology, but many of these have synergies across them, and we're both looking to ensure that UBS maximize the opportunities that we have in a safe manner. So we have quite a large number of close interactions where we gain insights into the activity. We have one-to-ones with the front office employees who are executing the AI strategy, and we attend meetings as the front office work through their ideation space. I think one of the really interesting recent examples where you're talking about collaboration with front office is where we saw an instance that the first line were developing an AI driven control around client communications, whilst at the same time, the second line were also developing a parallel control around client communications, leveraging the power of LLM to do deep dives into the text data that was contained in what we're sending to our clients. The area where I think this is really interesting is when you start looking at the conflicts that you have when you have two AI engines which are built by ChatGPT, for example, being used in first line and second line of defense to try and manage a very similar risk. And I think as an industry, we need to look at how AI is used across the three lines of defense and construct and ensure that we're constructing creating a construct across the three lines of defense where we minimize the risk of broad hallucination that would miss certain risks, whilst at the same time balancing synergies of access to technology along with having antagonistic approaches to these models interacting with each other. I think some of the solutions that are being proposed for this is that the front office use a large language model such as ChatGPT for their control, whereas the second line look at the other models that are available, such as Cloud, BERT, Llama, etc., so that we have different models that are running controls where they have synergies between them. There have also been discussions, or there are also other concepts out there around what is the next generation of AI, where we're talking about agentic front-to-back frameworks and how that concept can actually look. But as I say, these are early concepts and they're interesting ones to watch over the next few years as AI becomes more prevalent across all of the different lines of defense.
Right. And just want to remind everyone on the call as well that there is the opportunity to ask questions as well to anyone on the panel. We will be having a Q&A section later on. We heard from firms as part of our interviews this year that most use cases are still in the pilot phase rather than actually being deployed live. One of the common barriers that we hear from organizations in terms of AI adoption is around data, and often it's about the lack of good quality data. Stephen, what's your view on this and how have you approached it?
So I think that data quality is extremely important, both for regulatory, legal, and consistency perspectives. I think if you look from an operational perspective, you start seeing some real opportunities from the latest generation of AI. If we look at the classic AI, which I discussed earlier, where we were using things like semi-supervised learning, or even when you were building your own supervised learning models, it was absolutely fundamental that we had strong internal data sets which were tagged so that we could run training runs and test scenarios. As we've moved into the age of generative AI, we have it very much increasing flexibility with the structure of the data, where large language models are able to process both structured and semi-structured and even unstructured data inputs so that we can have a more flexible approach. I think Gen AI pipelines really need to focus on governance of the data, which is extremely important, along with the velocity that data reaches the teams and the accessibility, where previously you needed perfectly structured, clean data. LLMs have the ability to cleanse data before you're actually ingesting it into the process. where you're looking at examples of this. If you take the concept of matching issuers versus instruments, in the past, this has been complex, requiring you either to have a conversion key, which would need updating, or you would have to have an algebraic approach to it, such as Levenshtein distances between the words that are actually included in the issuers versus the instruments, right? What you can now start to do is explore how a large language model interprets the difference between an issuer and an instrument, and how they start pulling the two data sets together, removing the requirement of a key. As I say, this is an interesting area, and if you're very much interested in Gen AI models, there's quite an interesting paper that was released by OpenAI recently, looking at short form approaches to factuality of AI, and it's that kind of research that's really key to understanding where we can use AI and reliance upon it.
I think it's really interesting to hear that it framed as an opportunity around data. Because I think so often we just hear data in terms of a challenge and almost like something that poses a blocker to deploying AI. So yeah, really, really interesting way to think about the potential for AI to actually help you manage your unstructured and messy data, which I'm sure most people on the call will relate to. Claire, very quickly, just coming to you as well, thinking through some of the potential kind of use cases that you have as well. What other challenges or blockers to acceleration have you seen, and how do you think they can be overcome?
From legal, given that I'm within legal, regulatory uncertainty, so the evolving and inconsistent regulations across jurisdictions, not necessarily a blocker, but definitely a challenge for me and my legal colleagues, and also those in compliance. I think for that, it's very much in terms of managing that, it's regulatory collaboration and engagement. So, speaking to your regulators, membership and industry associations like AFME, possibly also participating in peer-to-peer collaboration initiatives, just really making sure that you are aware of the issues, are talking to others who are facing similar issues as you, to maybe come up with solutions, standards, just to kind of unpick that regulatory maze that we're having to deal with. Data, and so Stephen's already mentioned that. I'd probably see it more of a challenge, but taking on board what Stephen has said, yes, I can see that there are also some interesting things that we can work through once the data is in a better quality than maybe some of us are having to deal with at the moment. Talent and skill gaps, you've mentioned that already. I think a big one though is probably cultural and organizational kind of, I don't want to say resistance, but in some cases it may be resistance, right? So we may have those in the organization who have a fear of job displacement or distrust in AI-driven, kind of decisions. And so for that, I think that there does need to be training. There does need to be a kind of bringing along your employees on that journey with you to really kind of highlight and publicize the advantages of AI and how it could potentially kind of open up time for us to do more of the value added work rather than maybe some of those mundane tasks. But I think that that's quite an important thing, really making sure from a cultural perspective that AI is, I guess, at best embraced, at worst, people are open to kind of see what it's about. And then ethical concerns, again, I think it was something that was touched on in the keynote. And there, I think it's really about ensuring that ethics by design, really ensuring that you are, when you are building, when you are designing, building and deploying, ethics is at the core, pretty similar to what we have for privacy by design in the GDPR. And then you've also mentioned clients as well. And similar to your workforce, it's kind of bringing your clients on a journey that may happen through some of the collaboration in peer-to-peer collaboration initiatives that you do, but really making sure that you are as transparent as you can be with your clients so that they also aren't fearing what it is that we're doing with their data and with AI.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire. If I can just pick up a related yet separate theme around governance, and monitoring and oversight over AI. I mean, just broadening the horizon slightly, I know not only compliance, legal, second line functions, but AI is being adopted right across organizations with lots of usage in the first line as well. I'd be interested, Aman, maybe in your view from an AFME perspective, what are some of the trends you're seeing over the last 12 to 14 months when it comes to governance and oversight?
Yeah, thanks, Bal. So we run a risk and governance forum here at AFME, and we meet monthly with all of our members to help them work through the challenges of AI governance. And I think what we've seen there is fundamentally AI and machine learning is not new to banking. We've been using it for more than a decade. And while it started off initially as being pretty much a side of the desk activity, it soon moved into governance generally within the model risk function. And when, I guess, this AI revolution, if you'd like to call it that, kicked off, 18, 24 months ago, largely driven by generative AI, we saw firms start to think about what that means for their governance models. And in most cases, what we saw was most firms pretty much shoehorned it straight back into model risk because that's where the expertise lay. That's where the individuals were who could actually do this exercise. And that worked well for a time. But as the use cases have developed, become more complex and become more in quantity, if nothing else, increasingly we're seeing firms start to look into creating more specific AI governance functions. But to the extent to which they're doing that really depends very much on where firms are along that journey. So in many cases, we've seen some firms who have taken a very large enterprise level approach where they're looking at externally defined frameworks and trying to kind of shoehorn them into a financial services context and create an enterprise AI, enterprise AI hub, enterprise AI GIF governance function. And that's great for some firms. Other firms are taking more of a hybrid model where they're looking at potentially getting to that model, but they're still leaning very heavily on model risk. So it's model risk in conjunction with these newer AI governance functions coming along. While others are still at much an early stage of their journey, and they're still fully embedding on model risk and starting to think about what this governance function is going to mean. The other thing to mention is in terms of frameworks, as I mentioned, that there are a lot of frameworks out there. A lot of our members here will be aware of a lot of them, but they're not really, in many cases, financial services specific. So banks are having to tweak them to make them work as best they can. And increasingly, market specific ones are coming out. In fact, AFME, we're working on one currently with our members to build up a market specific AI governance framework. So if for members who want more details on that, please speak to your members of the AI forum, and we're happy to discuss. But I think it's a very interesting space to see where that's going to be moving for the next 12, 24 months as this more, as AI starts to become a defined function in its own right, as opposed to something being done off the side of model risk or potentially something else. And I think compliance is going to be a big part of that, as part of that governance framework, as a very important seat at the table when it comes to assessing these AI use cases going forward.
No, fantastic to hear that view, Aman. And Claire, would be interested in your view. I mean, how does that align with what you see in your organization?
Yeah, it aligns. I would definitely say looking at our risk management frameworks and governance around AI last year and where it is this year, it has definitely evolved. Similar to what Aman said, we've been leveraging existing risk management and governance frameworks where we can, and then just kind of building, onto those frameworks where we feel that there is a need. So we last year we formed an AI hub, which was basically AI machine learning technologists who were there to build an enterprise AI platform. During the course of this year, we've established an AI council with senior level execs on that council who are there as an escalation point, but also to kind of oversee the strategy. We've got data usage review boards for both proof of concepts and production use cases, a number of AI related working groups, some focused on our AI strategy, legal and regulatory change. And then there's also been a data ethics function as well. So I think that evolution will continue. I think the one thing though I'd like to flag, and I think it's been alluded to elsewhere on this call, is that kind of multidisciplinary cross-line of defense approach to governance. So yes, legal, risk and compliance and within BMY are very much at that table, actively participating in both the council, the data usage review boards, the working groups, and really making sure that there is close collaboration with first line.
Fantastic. Well, there is so much to further deep dive into, but I'm very conscious of time. I'd like to bring the panel to a close so we can leave a little bit of time for questions, but I just would like to end with one reflection from both yourself, Claire, and Stephen. I mean, we've heard lots about the power of AI and what it can do, but we've consistently heard the thread of the concept of human in the loop. And I'd just love your reflection as we end the panel. Maybe I'll start with you, Claire, just on how you see that working and the importance of it.
I think it is very important. I think if we're looking at it from a client perspective, one of the challenges I'd mentioned earlier was around the clients. I think having human in the loop there would definitely allay some concerns. But I think that maybe in a couple of years, there'll be a little bit more acceptance of maybe that kind of end-to-end kind of AI decision making. But I think for right now, there is so much value that people can bring as part of the process. We've mentioned the kind of hallucinations, we've mentioned, maybe issues with output. So we definitely do need to be checking. I think it's also something that regulators are expecting to see as well, right? So I think for now it is very important. It's definitely important to me, especially when, BMY, in some of its use cases, I'm sure we'll be looking to rely on that, but we really do need to make sure that the output is as it should be.
Final reflections from you, Stephen.
So I think in terms of compliance, humans are an absolute critical part of it. We own relationships with front office and challenge them on their activities. From my team's perspective, in the implementation area, we're primarily focused on developing AI solutions that bring new capabilities and support business-aligned compliance in scaling their activities. So far, we have no outputs which have decommissioned or removed humans from any of the processes. Instead, we're looking to strengthen their capabilities. I think, again, where we've built processes like the ones I mentioned earlier, all of the AI outputs are being delivered to humans so that they can review them before they're used for actual action.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. There was so much content in there that we could deep dive into, but I'm very conscious of time. I think the overarching theme, 14 months ago, where we felt there were a number of challenges coming through. It's so interesting to hear both of you speak on how your organizations and yourselves have overcome a number of those challenges to mature the use of AI. And I think it feels like a very exciting horizon in really enabling compliance to be so much more than it is today through the usage of compliance, through the use of AI. So really, really exciting. With that said, I'll maybe hand over to Michael and Aman to see if they've got any questions from the panel.
Thank you very much, Val. We certainly do. For participants in the call, I draw attention to the participant Q&A function. We do have a question submitted already, and we have questions submitted in advance of the webinar, so we will shortly begin to answer those. If you do have a question, I'd encourage you to begin to type it out, to submit it. We can take advantage of free expertise provided by our panelists, so let's see how many we can get through. Without further ado, Stephen, I might start with you. You closed your last sentence, or your last statement, by talking about humans and the ongoing importance of humans, which comes up quite a lot in the discussions that AFME members have in compliance and where we might go with AI. You have quite an interesting personal trajectory, having gone from generalism to specialism and having gone from compliance to science. So perhaps thinking of the team that you lead and the recruitment exercises that you've undertaken these few years, can you talk a little bit about how the skills of compliance officers have changed now versus 5 or 6 years ago, or even perhaps 1 or 2 years ago, to give us an indication of what challenges you faced, how you overcome those challenges, and where we might go in perhaps the near and midterm future?
So yeah, like this is obviously a topic that's very dear to my heart, that I'm very interested in as a manager of a data science team that's integrated into front office compliance. So I think the skills of compliance are very rapidly evolving. Where we have data scientists, and I think where our team really excels, is that many of them started off in front office compliance. They did their CISI exams, and they have strong groundings in actual compliance. We've then put a lot of them through masters in data science, by which point they're able to have a very rounded knowledge that blends the two disciplines together. And there's almost an investment in people's time and giving our staff the right education and training opportunities, which come both externally and internally, to create these teams with hybrid capabilities, which, as I was kind of mentioned originally, with the federated model, it gives us the ability to have an agile workforce that are able to interact with both compliance officers, front office, and develop AI solutions which are bespoke to investment banking, compliance, and manage the risks as we see them emerge.
Thank you very much. Stephen, I get from that is predominantly more junior staff, people towards the beginning of their careers. I might then turn to you, Claire. Taking notes from one of your earlier interventions, you mentioned the establishment of a senior AI council, including senior execs who undertake governance roles of AI. And I thought that was quite interesting. For people who are more senior, perhaps a little more advanced, more experienced in traditional matters, how have you found senior execs coming to terms with AI, learning new concepts, understanding both strategic and tactical challenges that are posed by AI? How has that population responded to the technological developments of the last 3, 4, 5 years? And where do you think they might go, and people who aspire to those roles in the future to come?
So I think the education piece, right, in the way that I had mentioned that training, senior execs are also going through similar training. I guess they're also, it has been a steep learning curve. I mean, there are so many things, there are new risks, there are some uncertainties, I guess, with the regulations. But I think similar to the rest of the workforce, it really has been around the education, the kind of peer-to-peer learning at that level, understanding, I guess, the efficiencies that could be built in by using AI. I think also very much focus on the return on investment as well on some of these things. But yeah, I think that we also need to ensure that, I guess, what we're getting is a kind of consistent messaging that's flowing down. So communication down and also communication up as well. I mean, that's probably all I could say on that, really.
That's fine. Thank you for that. Claire, I'll stay with you. I won't ask you to talk in detail about the future of the context of the EU AI Act, because I think we could be here for quite some time. But how do you see the AI regulatory landscape, perhaps in the UK, in the context of the EU AI Act, and the new government in the US? What do ongoing political developments, perhaps, or legal developments mean for a legal function dealing with AI, and how might we best meet those challenges?
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing is different regulatory approaches based on jurisdiction. So you mentioned the EU AI Act, very granular, very prescriptive. You've got the UK, and I probably put Singapore into the bucket of being a little bit more guidance, kind of risk-based, and then you've got the US, which to date has been quite fragmented, very much looking at AI regulation on a state-by-state basis. I think some of the issues that we within legal are having to face with AI regulation aren't new. We are always having these kind of different regulatory regimes, and then we've got to look across the piece and kind of connect the dots to best advise our clients. But I touched on some of the things that I think will definitely help with that, the kind of advocacy, the participation in these industry working groups like AFME, horizon scanning, really being on, legal and compliance, working very, very closely together on the horizon scanning piece, also working very, very closely with your public policy and governmental affairs team on the advocacy part, just really making sure that you are getting involved in any and all discussions that are going on, see whether or not we can kind of maybe smooth out some of those inconsistencies. I mean, I know many of us here would probably like to have some kind of global taxonomy, a nice standard definition of AI. Unfortunately, we don't have that. But as I said, some of these issues aren't new. When privacy came, we had the GDPR, and then we had a plethora of, privacy legislation coming out across the globe. It was kind of the same. Some of it was very different. So it's just really making sure that you are informed and you are kind of keeping close to some of the conversations that are going on within industry when it comes to AI.
Thank you. Certainly, a shared taxonomy is a common request that we see in compliance functions in the AFME membership. I think it would be very positive if we could have shared understandings between jurisdictions. I think politically we're in a very interesting time, so we'll see what Mr. Trump makes of this. Stephen, we have a couple of questions on data quality. So to what extent do you think that data quality cleanups and strong data governance can unlock the potential of AI? You mentioned that large language models are becoming better at dealing with structured and unstructured data. Does that mean that data governance and quality will be less important in the future?
No, is the simple answer to is data quality and governance going to be less important? So I think data governance is one of the most important things with AI. We need to, as Claire's spoken about, there's a range of rules coming from, and regulations coming from multiple different sources, which require us to have clean data. And if we don't understand where our data comes from, whether it includes CID, client identifying data, whether it includes personal data, those are absolute key and fundamental, irrelevant of how you then process the data. If we then start looking at the ability to interrogate data, I think that's where the point of actual structure of it becomes more fluid, and the ability to use large language models to analyze data it opens a huge number of opportunities. It also gives us opportunities to take our unstructured data and make it far more structured, and be able to focus on enhancing the way in which we look at the data protection, data management, and other opportunities such as that. So to your question, I cannot see AI making data governance less important. It is exactly the opposite. It is more important than it ever has been. Data is playing a critical role to our organizations. It's at the heart of a lot of what we're doing. And if you want definitive, tangible insights, you can also often use data to back up the points that you're trying to make.
So if I could just add to that, to certainly what we're seeing on our members on the data question again, is that a lot of our members are finding that actually the importance of data in AI and how much it's becoming almost critical to the deployment of the AI systems is actually now starting to greenlight previous projects which previously were held up. So from a tech team's point of view, this is news to their ears, right? So they've been trying to get a lot of these data cleanup projects done for the last 5-7 years in many cases, but they were never high priority enough. So increasingly, we're seeing firms actually now getting budget to do the data cleanup exercise and to clean up a lot of the legacy tech debt because of the AI use cases. And that obviously has huge benefits across the firm in general. So that's certainly something we're seeing across our members.
Thank you, Aman. Steve, a question from the floor links to an earlier question posed to Claire about communicating the value of structured data to senior management, especially where management understanding may be less comprehensive than other employees. The question is, how have you successfully communicated the value of structured data to senior management when limited understanding of data-driven approaches might make them hesitant to embrace change? What strategies in particular did you use to address concerns, and how did you showcase the long-term benefits to gain buy-in?
So I think the key here really is value proposition that AI offers to an organization, looking at what the strategic use case is and how it can benefit us in terms of our risk management. In terms of the value of structured data, I think, Aman, you just kind of mentioned it in terms of there's more investment people understand. I think from a management perspective, we're seeing a huge amount more training and engagement for management in data science and understanding what the organization is doing and what the organization we see employees at all levels of the organization kind of engaging in the journey. By presenting very strong and compelling use cases, we're able to very much show what the importance is of having access to cognitive services are, being able to use APIs to delve into unstructured data sets and have the budget and funding to really reinforce the need. I think also where you have a very strong tangible case is where we're implementing AI in a responsive or in a responsive manner, where we've seen issues within the organization. We know what the value of the loss is against if we have a control gap, and we're able to fill these control gaps by using specific bespoke IP AI solutions that enable us to interrogate, back to the kind of the original point, these large data sets, having access to them in kind of scaled manners that previously were not possible. So it really is the insights and value proposition and making this clear to everyone involved.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Claire, I might come to you for perhaps a philosophical question before we draw to a close. You spoke in an earlier intervention about ethical concerns and ethics by design. Who and how should decide the ethics of AI? What different ideas have you had within your firm? And from a wider perspective, how do you view the ethics of the technological revolution that's in front of us? How can AI, how can the technology that we're dealing with become moral?
That is a very, very difficult question. Thank you so much for that. Other panelists, I'd really appreciate if you could jump in. I think there does need to be some consideration, around whether or not just because we can doesn't mean that we should, right? So I think that there does need to be some consideration around that. I think it will depend on, I guess, where you sit in an organization. As I said, earlier on, it's about bringing individuals on a journey with you, and them having, I guess, some confidence in the fact that you are giving some thought and consideration to these deployments, rather than just doing a kind of scattergun approach. It's really making sure that, if you are using these solutions, you are thinking about the outcomes. Are they discriminatory? The bias, in terms of the data that's being used. Should we be using some of that data? I mean, there's a multitude of questions that I'm sure that the other panelists could, also add to. I think it's going to be a question that keeps on coming up, and new things will be kind of thrown into the mix, and new ways of thinking about it will kind of evolve. But it's a tricky one, because I think, at its core, there are so many benefits, but then there are so many fears and so many anxieties around this, that I think that this, as I said, that question around ethics is going to be something that just continues to evolve as we continue to use AI.
Claire, thank you very much. I think you've rather neatly encapsulated a lot of the discussions we've had in AFME on this topic, particularly on the bias in data. If we have biased data, then we produce biased machines, which produce then biased outcomes. The obvious solution, I think, is to get better data, but how to do that remains a challenge that I think we could talk for quite some time on. Stephen, you've given us good views on that. I am conscious of time, so I will thank particularly Claire Royal of BNY and Stephen Moore of UBS. Your insight is valued, and we are grateful to you for taking the time both to prepare for this webinar and to speak to us this morning. To the audience, thank you for joining us. We hope you found this session insightful and useful. And to Val and Sarah, thank you for an excellent presentation and for introducing and guiding our discussion so skillfully. As for AFME, we remain very engaged on compliance and AI in both our tech ops and compliance sides of the house. We have dedicated teams in each of these divisions following and indeed leading the debate, and we'd welcome participation from our membership and potential future future members, for those who might find that helpful and help us to lead the conversations with key stakeholders. The work does not stop here. Our journey will continue. We'd certainly welcome your thoughts and comments. We'd also like feedback on this event. Feedback is incredibly valuable to us, and it helps ensure that our events deliver the greatest value possible. We look forward to seeing you all again soon, members and members-to-be. We thank you and hope you've enjoyed this session, and we wish you the very best for your day. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.